gives me time to think about where I am. So, so we're going to talk about categories now. I'm going to show you some characteristics, but I just wanted you to each have somebody in mind that maybe you could think about these characteristics and say, do they do that? After we go over the characteristics, we're going to go into a little bit of detail about, like, if they have this characteristic, what are some things that you would do to get along with them better? So I'm going to start sharing this again. Hopefully nothing goes awry. I know better than to push more than one button while I'm. Let's see. All right, so you're seeing that full screen again. Okay, good. All right, so next we have the characteristics. So characteristics of, no, we don't have characteristics. Now we have characteristics. Characteristics of people who tend to be difficult to deal with. So they did this research study. I'm not going to bore you with all the details like I would my students, but they had this study where they had these people who were antagonists. They seemed to antagonize a lot of people around them. So they did this study. They did this qualitative study where they had people describe people, and they came up with these themes. Actually, there's one more theme. It's risk taking, but I didn't see that being something y'all needed to know about, so I left that one out. But it is safe to assume, right, that the discomfort that you feel comes from somebody else and not your own weaknesses and deficiencies. That's what we're going to go with right now. We are going to talk about them, and I think that's an easier road for us to walk down together first, and then we are going to take a look at ourselves for a little bit. But we know that they came up with these themes. So we're going to talk about each one of these and exactly like 3 or 4, maybe 5, especially the aggressive one. I want to give you a few more resources on that one. But how do you deal with each of these traits? And we're going to go in them one by one. So the first one is callousness. I just realized when I turned to that slide that it's like callous is feet. Yeah, okay, anyway. So when somebody is callous, they lack empathy. And empathy is, we, like in Star Trek, they had the empath who could catch other people, figured out what other people's feelings were really easily. And this is the opposite of that. This is somebody who you could be really aggravated with them and they wouldn't understand. They just wouldn't get it. So when we're interacting with people who have this trait, so think about it first. Think about your person again and see if this describes them. So do they have a hard time like caring about what you're feeling or what somebody else is feeling? So when we interact with people who have this callousness, here's some tips. First of all, if they're critical, don't take their criticisms too personally because they're not trying to be critical. They just have a hard time reading. Sometimes people are trying to be all these things. I guess I should say that. But usually everybody's doing the best they can with what they have at the moment. So if they do criticize you, if you think about somebody not knowing how that would make you feel, then it's a little easier to not take it personally. Don't try to make them understand your feelings because somebody who has a hard time understanding your feelings, that might just be a waste of time. And so you're going to get frustrated because now you've tried to spell it out to them and now they're still not getting it. And they're frustrated because why don't you understand that they don't really care? So you want to be careful about trying to over-explain your feelings, which comes into this facts one. So you want to list the facts when you're with them. Sometimes when we show sympathy for them, it kind of plays into their hands. So we want to just kind of keep discussions centered on facts only, which makes sense, right? If somebody has a hard time reading feelings, then if you keep it on facts, it's less likely to get out of control. And the next one, I have no problem thinking I'm greater than everybody else. No, grandiosity, I think it's a word that we've thrown around since high school maybe, but feeling like you're better than everybody else. And a lot of people nowadays are looking into this new narcissist, like everybody's a narcissist if they're not caring about you. And that's kind of what this grandiosity speaks to. So what do you do if somebody thinks that they're better than you and you're the president and you're doing all the work and they think that they know better and they can do better? It's really hard, especially if when the meeting's shut down and everybody goes home, they don't do anything else. They just want to tell you that they could do it better if they invested the energy. So these people are sometimes hard to be around. If somebody tries to state that they're better than you, like to lord it over you, I can't think of a better word than that, but kind of like, I'm better than you and I want you to know it. You have to do a few things that will keep you a little safer from somebody like that, because they can be pretty toxic. But one thing that you don't want to do is to kind of bow down to them and say, oh, you're right, you know everything. Because if you're afraid of confrontation, which a lot of people are, like polite company, you don't confront people. But if you are too soft with some people, it doesn't help the relationship either. So if somebody's being grandiose and feeling like the big shot, it doesn't often pay to let them feel that way. It's a lot better to be have solid boundaries with these people. So even if there's nothing that should make them think that they are right about something, you don't want to say, you don't want to criticize them in your response. You want to stick to the facts. So if you criticize somebody who's narcissistic, then they're just gonna feel like they have to prove themselves even more. You want to just disempower that whole situation by watching your wording and don't lose your sense of purpose, like what are we all doing here? And if you keep it focused on that and you don't let them yank the attention of the whole meeting or discussion, then that's the best way to deal with grandiosity. The next one is the one I want to spend a little bit more time on. Oops, and I went too far. And now I don't know how to go back. Oh, I did. I pressed a little arrow. Some things are so nice when they go easy. All right, so the one I want to spend a little more time with is aggressiveness, because it can be a dangerous situation if somebody's being aggressive. And people have different normal characteristics, like their baseline could tend to be a little bit more aggressive. And what do you do with that? So obviously it means they're hostile, they're often rude to other people. Sometimes if we're stressed out even, we can tend to be a little aggressive too. But if somebody's doing it regularly, you have to get some help. It's not going to be enough to just take these words that I'm saying and try and get somebody to like change their way of being, because you can't change other people. We change how we react to it. So if somebody really is being aggressive on a continuous basis, I would seek out help for that. But for normal aggressive people, for people who have exhibiting this characteristic, but not all the time, there are some things that you can do, such as like simple things like staying a safe distance from somebody who's see that they're feeling acting aggressively. You want to avoid escalating the situation by not taking anything personally again, like I said with grandiosity. You want to be able to effectively communicate, and you want to be able to stand up to them safely, especially if you're in charge of a discussion or a meeting, and somebody's getting aggressive. As the leader, you have to be able to stand up to them safely so that you can keep everybody else safe. So beyond all that, when we are talking about people who are aggressive, there's like these four main steps that are on the slide. So the first thing is to remain calm. The last thing to do with somebody who's being aggressive is to get aggressive back. So we want to be calm and grounded. If we're stressed already ourselves, we can become angry right back, and you can't fight fire with fire, right? So we have to make sure that we're calm. We stop and take a couple breaths. When we exhibit self-control, so a lot of times somebody who is, just out of character being aggressive, they'll calm down too, because you'll be role modeling it for them. So take a few deep breaths and make sure that you stay calm. The next thing is to empathize with them. So you want to more often than not, if they're being aggressive, it's because they're stressed out. And if we're being aggressive, it's because we're stressed out. But if you empathize with them, if you try and talk to them about what's stressing them out or why they're stressed, which is dessert spelled backwards. If you try and figure out what's wrong, if they're talking about how they didn't get any sleep last night, then you can talk to them about that. Just discuss their frustration. Of course, if you're in the middle of something bigger, you can't just stop everything and do that. But it is okay to empathize and say, I can see that you're very frustrated right now. I'm going to move on with this, but I'd be happy to talk about this with you afterward. And that's what goes along with expressing your concern, and be honest with yourself. Everybody tends to get aggressive from time to time, like even the most quiet, kind person, when they're stressed out, can show aggression. So sometimes it's good to notice that, we're not perfect either. And then talk about it. Don't just like, if somebody stops being aggressive and you don't see them again, then I don't want you to like run after them and discuss their aggression. But if it's somebody that you're like, somebody that is a coworker or somebody who's an active member, you would want to talk to them about it and say, this is what I'm noticing to you, especially when they're not angry. So if you can get them somewhere in a calm state and talk to them about it, then you can often work these things out. Any questions or comments? Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a question. Mike Crockett here, member of the Larchmont Edgewater Civic League. And it's been a while since I've been to a Civic League meeting. I attended a Zoom one recently, but I was wondering, in your experience when you were leading a Civic League, when you had those people, did you have any help like during the meeting? Was it something that you would talk to a potential troublemaker, for lack of a better descriptor, before the meeting or offline or phone call or person to person, or was it just live in action and you had to deal with it? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. I appreciate you asking that. I had a lot of pushback when I first started, especially. There I don't know if this is really describing anybody else's civic league or airing out Glenwood Park laundry, but there was a couple families who had historically just been, the president and the secretary and the treasurer And it had been a while since anybody new had stepped in. So when I first stepped in, people felt like I was stepping on their toes, really. And so I had to deal with that both ways that you're saying. Like in a meeting, um, if somebody would just say no, or that, we've tried it that way before and it didn't work, those kind of things that people like to say, like just to be a naysayer, then I would just say, yes, I realize that you tried it before and it didn't work. I'm asking that we stay open to this. Or I would say, is there anybody else who's feeling that way? Try and figure that out. But also, I always stayed after and talked to people after the meeting. And in that way, some of the people, once they got used to me doing that and could count on that, they would just save it for the end. They didn't have to act out in the middle of it. So that was my experience. Has anybody else had experience with people like that? All right. Thank you for the question. This next one we're going to go over very quickly because I don't think that I just really liked the graphic with the suspicious person looking through the blinds, because that's what we do in our neighborhoods, right? I found a quote that said, we want our neighbors to be as suspicious enough to call the police if something's happening or something like that. And I said, yes, right? So suspiciousness isn't necessarily a bad thing. It could be, but it's distrust in others when there's like little to no evidence. In my case, I felt like there was little to no evidence that I would be anything less than trustworthy. But there were people who just, didn't really give me much of a chance at first. Here are some things that I probably could have done a lot better if I had studied it. But the experts say, explain what you're thinking. So don't try to ask them what they're thinking. And I thought that's really good. So if I'm explaining all the way out my steps and my thinking behind things, then somebody who's suspicious might be less suspicious. If I don't say, well, what are you thinking? And then they feel like they might be manipulated, I can say, this is what I'm thinking and this is why I'm thinking it. And then kind of brainstorming with them and helping them to come up with some of the processes that you're doing instead of you always being top down, handing things down. And also acknowledging that we're human. So acknowledge that, if something's wrong, say I don't know, that you said the wrong number when you were given the treasurer's report, and somebody's like, oh my goodness, where did all this money go? You can say, well, I'm sorry. Obviously, I made a mistake there. And you can be humble, and the humility sometimes disempowers the suspiciousness. But definitely, they say one of the most important things not to do is to get defensive. Because if somebody's suspicious that you're carrying on, and instead of explaining it out, you're just like, well, I did my best. Are they going to be less suspicious or more? So they're probably going to be more suspicious if you talk like that. So that one isn't often hasn't for me been a big giant problem, but I'm sure that there are some people who have to deal with suspicious people. The next one is manipulation. And there are all kinds of cool graphics where manipulation is concerned, if you ever want to know. But this one was cool, like the little puppet strings. So people who are manipulators, they exploit others and events, exploit things and people to benefit themselves. So they often know how to push our buttons because that's how they manipulate us. They can scare us, they can coerce, obligate, guilt, bribe. They do all kinds of things to try and get us to do the thing the way that they would have us do it. Sometimes they'll do the positive side, the overly positive side. They'll flatter you. They'll say, "Oh, let me help," or they'll act sympathetic to what's going on, but they don't really care. Um, all kinds of like emotional blackmail. So if you know somebody who's a manipulator, that can be very frustrating, especially if they have some people who are like conspirators with them in the place where you're talking about, whether that's a civic league or work or whatever, or family even. So here's some things you can do with manipulators. First of all, this is so easy. Take everything they say with a grain of salt, right? That's so hard, right? If somebody you know is a manipulator and they're saying some things, then it's hard for you not to get bristly right back to them. They say to trust your instincts. Often, when we come up against somebody who's antagonistic in any of these ways that we're talking about, we know it in our gut. We're just like, I don't know. There's just something about them. And when we feel that way, we should trust our instincts. It doesn't mean that we have to try to get them fired or something, but we can be more careful and more guarded with what we say and what we trust them with. Um, when somebody is a manipulator, don't compromise with them. Don't try and ask their permission to do anything. Make sure, in this case again, that you set very firm boundaries. I'm sorry, here is where you're not going to cross. Um, and it says know when to walk away, and I included that anyway, but lots of times you can't just walk away if you're in a leadership role. So you want to make sure that you are both aware and open-minded. So are they really trying to manipulate you, or do they just want to have their point of view heard? And so when you do that, you can um, discern whether or not to take what they say as truth or not. Whew. Any questions about any of those two or three that I just went over? All right. This is the last
Hi, my name is
paragraph.
Barbara Dolgia,
Hey, Barbara.
Princess Park Civic League. I have a question about suspiciousness. What if
Yeah.
what if we become suspicious of who we're dealing with? How do we handle that? Because they may be manipulators, and we are
Yes.
suspicious of what's going on and what is their motive.
Right, right. So it's not paranoia if they really are out to get you.
Mhm.
So yeah, so if you're feeling suspicious, I think that a lot of that goes with, like you're saying, with the manipulation. So usually if somebody's trying to be manipulative, we're going to feel suspicious of them. And how do we get over that? Well, the first thing you already kind of said is maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you should be a little bit suspicious of somebody and their motives if they are always around when everything goes um, to something. I don't know. My COVID vocabulary, I miss a few words. To pot, that's the word. All right. So anyway, so that's one thing to know is sometimes being suspicious is the right thing to be, but you just have to keep an open mind too. Like, so just because this one thing happened this way, and they had a had a hand in it, doesn't mean that they're necessarily involved in the next thing that happens. So being able to look again, take another look, and give people chances, that's part of working in the civic leagues for sure, is trying to give people second chances, but not letting them take your sight off of your goals. So when you're suspicious of somebody, I say go with your gut, protect the things that you are responsible for. If that's the whole civic league, then you have to do that. I would, last thing I would say about that is to spend more time with them, because when when we're suspicious of somebody and we get to know them better, we'll either know that we probably should be suspicious of them, or we'll get where they're coming from and it won't make us feel that way. Thanks, Barbara. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome. So the last characteristic is domineering. So somebody wants to be in control. I think that this is the one that I dealt with the most, because a lot of people want to be at the top, but not necessarily do the things that need to be done to keep them there. So if somebody wants to be in control just to be in control, what I've done, just like the short story, is I've given them a little bit of control. And then if they take it on and they actually move, then it's not a bad thing, because I'm helping them to get their energy out in a positive way. But if they don't take it and run with it, then these are the things we have to do. First of all, don't believe the lie when they play the victim. Like, oh, I should have done this, but I couldn't, and poor me. And they're just trying to control you so that they can, then manipulate the situation. So the other thing is to recognize the patterns over time. So yeah, what is it? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. That kind of thing. So if it's a pattern of them doing that, then you giving them some kind of control would be a bad thing for the group that you're in. So carefully choose a response with somebody who's being domineering, because they're used to trying to be in power. So here's the shortcut of ideas if you're like face to face. First is you could ignore them and walk away. Not always a valid choice when we're dealing in the neighborhood. We could distract or change the subject. And sometimes if they're really domineering, they'll try and take over the new subject too. We can ask a question of them. This one works quite well. If you ask them, okay, so you're saying this would work. What does that look like? And how would we go about doing that? So you are giving them a little bit of power over the conversation at the moment anyway. And then the other two, I'm not going to worry about, because really running out of time on so many things that I want to share with you. I'm going to skip a couple slides. Those are all the characteristics, right? I also wanted to talk to you about what difficult people tend to do, right? They tend to do these 5 things. It's all about them. They don't do you a favor unless they're collecting back for it. They're victims. They can be oblivious. They whine, blame, and gossip. That last one I want to go over, even though I have to skip so much of it. When we get together with people who are in the same situation as us, and it's a difficult situation, it is so easy for us to just go to speak down to the lowest common denominator, right? Like, we are so discouraged because this and that didn't happen. Then we get stuck there, and it's like this sucking tornado, which just like drags the whole energy out of everybody. So we are going to talk about, I'm going to skip the next slide. I'll give you a copy of the slides if you're interested. This was just some phrases that you could say if you were dealing with somebody who's negative, but I don't think that's going to be as helpful as us quickly taking a look at ourselves. This is what makes people stop being them and being part of us. Not saying that you have these challenges, but there is a possibility that you could have some of these things going on. And this list I got specifically from like 10 things, 10 signs you might be taking things too personally. You're obsessed with other people's opinions. If you're always worried about what other people think, then that says something about you. So if you're always worried about like, oh no, everybody else loves this thing, but then one person says, oh, but that was ugly, and you choose to focus on that one, that's not helpful to you. If criticism overwhelms you, then you're probably taking things too personally. The paranoia and suspicion we talked about a little bit. If you always question why people are doing things instead of just accepting that they are doing things, you could be taking things too personally. And the last one, I think, is a really important one that people who are giving of themselves tend to be hypercritical of yourself. So you're already giving, but then you are going to tell yourself you don't give enough. So if you're doing any of these things, I didn't talk about all of them, it might mean that you're taking things too personally. And I just want to say that during COVID, everybody's taking everything too personally. It's what we do when we're stressed. It's what human beings do. So if you have any kind of negative self-talk, I can help heal you of that. But I'm going to teach you a better way of dealing with it yourself. So what we're going to talk about the last little bit is self-care. So in AA, they talk about this acronym HALT. You're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, you are more likely to relapse. And I thought that really is a good gauge for when we are going to act in a way that is not, that's going to make us one of the difficult people. If we are hungry, it's hard for our brain to be operating at full capacity. If we are angry, we've got all those hormones rushing around, like wanting us to fight, flight, or faint, and all these other F words. When we're lonely, get that for ain't. Okay. If we're lonely, which everybody seems to be having mega doses of now with COVID, and then if we're tired. So if we're stressed out and all these other things are happening, we often get a bad night's sleep, and that exacerbates it all. And I found this cute little graphic that talks about what you can do to take care of yourself. I'll give you a copy of it, like I said, and you can. But I want to share just one small tool with you before we close. And this is from an app that's called Calm. And I thought that it spoke to kind of what we were looking at today in that quote at the top, if the world seems cold to you, kindle fires to warm it. So when we find people difficult to be with, they could be really difficult to be with. We can't change them. We can only change us. So what do? Here are the things that you can do. I know that it's got lots of tiny writing, but again, doing a loving kindness meditation. You could do that in 30 seconds. Think of a friend who's been feeling stressed lately and do something for them. These are all ways that we can give to ourselves, sometimes by giving back to other people, sometimes just by thinking more kindly of ourselves, making lists of things that make us happy, and so on. So one last little piece. All right, so you probably noticed my sense of humor by now. So I've got some quotes for you to end this, because I think that you could have gone several ways with what I said. First, knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people. If you spot it, you got it, is often a message that we get. But I don't want to start out saying that, because there are real difficult people that we're dealing with, and it's not always us. If you have some respect for people as they are, you can be more effective in helping them to become better than they are. So if we accept people where they are and don't disrespect them on purpose, there's a chance that they'll live up to our new expectations of them. Of course, I don't have to attend every argument I'm invited to. I thought that was a great quote that we should look at. Dale Carnegie has a great quote that I don't have up there, but I just want to say it to you. When dealing with people, remember you're not dealing with creatures of logic, but with creatures of emotion, creatures bristling with prejudice and motivated by pride and vanity. And that is us. Like, we are all that. We are all emotional creatures. And just because we act out in one day doesn't mean that that's where we're going to sit. So try and give people another chance. But if you give them another chance and they are not willing to take it, you can shape a bush that looks like this and tell them, like a good neighbor, stay over there. Yeah. So that is my entire presentation. I have put my email address on this last slide. And like I said, I'll be happy to share the slide with Jim or the PowerPoint with Jim and share it with anybody who's interested. But I wanted to give you a chance for more questions about anything I said, or we can just do Norfolk neighborhood trivia.
Yes, that was great, Dr. Runyan. And we would love the slides. We'll make those available to everybody here tonight. But yeah, questions? No one has any questions?
I'm sorry, I was on mute. Can you hear me? This is Wanda Turner with our Middletown Arch Civic League. I have a question. I have one person that's always, the glass is half empty. She can always find fault in anything you do and try to get the other people to feel the same way. Like, no, that's not a good idea. We wasting our time. So to me, I'd rather try it and see what happens than to don't try it at all and nothing happens. How would you just kind of make them see that part of life? Just let's do it.
Yeah, that's a great question, Wanda. I was thinking as you said it that people there's two types of people. Like, there's one type of person who doesn't have anything better in mind. They just don't want you to change anything because people don't like change. There's another type of person who does have ideas other than what are coming up, and they want their way, and that would be the controlling person. So if it's just somebody who just says, well, that's not the way we've always done it, then sometimes you can talk to them by giving them opportunity to give you a better way. So I understand this isn't the way we've always done it, but I'm open to another suggestion and allowing them to have the floor to be able to do that, to be able to talk to you and suggest something. And then the other piece that you talked about, though, that I thought was really important is the convincing everybody else that it's not good either, right? That is so frustrating. It's like, that's why opening up the conversation to say, this isn't set in stone. These are just some ideas, and we're open to more ideas. Like, if anybody else has a different way that we can do this, let's do it. Let's try it. But this is just one way that we are going to look at it right now. So what you can't do is say, your glass is always half empty, and I'm tired of it. Because that's what I would feel like saying with people who are like that, like naysayers. And the last piece that I would say, Wanda, is try, if you can, and it's not always possible, try and enlist their help. If say, okay, I know we haven't tried it this way before, but I think like if we just try this one way, maybe it'll give us some ideas on other ways that we can make an impact. You know, would you mind doing this role in that or whatever?
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
This is Charlotte Smith with the Lake Taylor Civic League. We have several of those people that have come up and said, well, why are we doing it this way? Let's do it that way. And I say, well, that's a great idea. Would you like to head that up? And it's
Yes.
surprising how quickly they want to complain, but they don't want to head it up.
Thanks for the reminder, Charlotte. That is so one of the things that I say right away when somebody says, you know, we could have a carnival and blah, 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 blah. And I say, that's a great idea. Would you like to head that committee? And then, you know, nobody wants to do that. So I would often say like, okay, because there were, you know, not tons of people trying to be the board, you know, like president, vice president, those kind of people. And people would nominate people and I would say, okay, well, Joe's been nominated for secretary. All those in favor of Joe, raise your hand. All those not in favor of Joe, tell me what you're going to do. Because if Joe's the only one who stepped forward, that's who we're getting. Any other questions, comments? I'm sure you all are a great resource to each other. I don't believe that I am the all-knowing here.
I got to tell you, Dr. Runyan, I was really tempted to role play and just say something hostile and be demeaning and domineering. But yeah, anyway, thanks a lot. Really enjoyed this.
Thank you.
I have two questions. And by the way, I did put our NBN Academy evaluation up on the poll. If you don't mind taking that before we leave, that helps our office know where we stand and how to improve. We'd appreciate that. But the first question is, so, you know, if you were in a civic league and you really, where would you go to? Who would you talk to if you really needed help? You know, you sense somebody is, you know, perhaps aggressive and in a very unsafe way, not to the point where you need to call the police, but they're talking about hurting somebody. You know, who would you, you know, or you sense somebody really does have a mental disability, who would you recommend talking to?
That's a really hard one, Jim. And when you said that, I thought of like there's a homeless population, right? And they think that this corner is their corner, and yet they threaten other people who are walking by. I've had that happen, and we did call the community police. I can't remember the terminology for it, but the ones who would come to our civic league meeting and talk, we often would use them as resources when there was somebody who was actually being aggressive. That's harder though when you're talking about just the nuances. It's like, what do you do when there's somebody who's just always kind of aggressive, like always snarling and showing their teeth? The only thing I know how to do is either A, kill them with kindness, B, spend more time with them and try and figure out what's making them tick, or you do have to consult with somebody. I don't know who I would consult with at the city level. I know who I used to consult with, and it was wonderful because they had the whole city neighborhoods in civic leagues in mind, so they were able to give me a broader perspective of what was normal. So I didn't think like I had all the hard cases or the stuff to wade through.
Okay, thank you. Helpful. And that's good advertisement for our community resource officers.
Yes.
Put that in the, I'm going to turn the record off.